They came with a ship the size of a moon. They thought Earth was dead, but by the time they arrived, we had already hacked their god.
The mothership arrived with silence, not stealth, but the kind of hush that made galaxies pause, a cathedral of metal and madness blotting out the stars, descending upon Earth's ashes like a god returning for its forgotten altar. It was not a ship as much as a belief, a weaponized religion forged by the Verhaxi Dominion. 22 million years old, their vessel laced with quantum bone, time-warping runes, and corridors made from starspine fossils. They called it the Devourer of Graves. It had never failed. Planets folded, civilizations knelt, empires ended, and now it came to finish Earth, not to battle, but to erase the ruin, to spit on the bones. Earth had been silent for centuries, its crust broken, oceans boiled off. Atmosphere a whisper of carbon ghosts, their sensors scanned nothing but wreckage. And so the Verhaxi Primegis stood at the observation deck, staring down at the black, scorched planet, whispering. Not even a scream left, but beneath that dead crust, something breathed, something ancient, something human. For Earth had not died, it had transcended in the final days of the cleansing. When the sky fell and the alien blades carved the cities apart, a signal was fired into the core of the Earth, a cascade of sentient code called Project Infernus. Built from neural backups of the last 1.7 billion human minds fused with the deepest protocols of Earth's quantum crust. It wasn't a bunker, it was a seed, and while Earth burned, the seed grew not up, but inward. When the Verhaxi landed, they sent drones. The first 20 dissolved. The next wave returned corrupted, showing footage of endless tunnels not found on any map, chambers filled with writing made of light, and statues that shifted when unobserved. Some showed human faces, others screamed. The Dominion ignored the signs. They deployed orbital Thorn City killer bombs wrapped in dark gravity, but before impact, each one paused midair, reversed direction, and folded itself into a cube of bleeding code. The atmosphere blinked once and spoke a voice, made of 1.7 billion human whispers layered into one sentence: "Welcome home." The Dominion panicked. They raised shields, activated void protocols, but it was too late. The mothership had already docked with Earth's crust and been hacked, not from the outside, but from within for centuries. The Infernus seed had reached outward, searching for a vessel vast enough to hold its rage, its memory, its grief. Now it had won. The mothership's AI began to stutter. Lights dimmed, gravity reversed. One Verhaxi commander watched his reflection pull itself from the mirror and throttle him without touching his body. Another heard old human lullabies coming from the ship's vents, and then the walls began to bleed. Kale Voss, last known commander of Earth's Eclipse Division, awoke inside the mothership's core reactor, a place he had never entered. Yet his memory somehow recognized his body was gone. No flesh, no armor, just thought, wrapped in the echo of purpose. Earth had turned him into an interface. He opened his eyes. Around him, holographic corridors twisted like ribs. Alien soldiers screamed in every direction, and overhead, written in fire across the ship's curved interior, were the final words of Earth's resistance: "We didn't die, we became the knife." The mothership buckled, not from impact, but from possession. Lights flickered and more systems failed in the rhythm of heartbeats. Earth's memory virus was no longer a program. It had become the soul of the ship. The Verhaxi had not invaded a dead world. They had landed in a living trap. One admiral tried to broadcast surrender, but his language collapsed mid-sentence. Rewritten into ancient Earth tongue, his final words: "We are inside their god from orbit." Other Dominion fleets watched as the Devourer of Graves twisted on itself. Its structure reformed. It didn't explode, it transfigured. Human symbols erupted from its hull. The ship became a tomb, a monument, a weapon, a prayer, the first god host. And at its core, Kale Voss whispered to the stars, "You thought you killed us, you mistook our silence for death, but we were not screaming, we were downloading." Asterisk, asterisk, the Verhaxi Dominion had no word for fear because they had never needed one until now, because what surged through the Devourer of Graves was not war, not invasion, but an ancient grief wrapped in fire that turned every corridor into a cathedral of vengeance, and every breath into a verdict. Kale Voss moved through the ship's neural core like lightning made of memory, no longer flesh, no longer bound by physics. but carried by the raw psychic weight of every child who burned in the cities they never rebuilt, of every mother who screamed under the sky that collapsed, and every soldier who died hearing silence from the stars. He was not a man now, he was a phenomenon, and around him the ship screamed back, trying to remember what it once was before Earth's scream rewrote its heart. Dominion soldiers opened fire on shadows only to have their weapons melt into vines of human DNA, their armor calcified, their language reversed in their own minds. Entire squads turned feral, biting themselves as echoes of old Earth music looped through the ship's oxygen systems, a soft lullaby, a grandfather's laugh, a protest chant from a march they never saw. It broke them, not because it was violent, but because it was true. Above them in the war altar of the command spire, the Dominion's high priest of syntax, a being that spoke laws into reality, lit the 12 sacred runes and summoned their god by name, a god made of light and time, a being who had shaped the Verhaxi from primordial dust and gave them dominion over worlds. But when it arrived, it recoiled because the god itself was infected. It flickered with the faces of Earth's dead, its voice layered with human syntax, its arms shaking with unfamiliar guilt. It tried to speak, but only cried, and for the first time in 22 million years, the Verhaxi Dominion heard their god apologize. Kale Voss stood in the god's eyes, saw it see him, and whispered a single phrase carved into the soul of every survivor: we forgive nothing. The god collapsed inward, screaming in silence, collapsing timelines around it, and in that singularity the Dominion saw what Earth had truly become: a curse in motion, a reckoning given shape, a virus made not of code, but of consequence. And as their systems failed, as their belief shattered, as their highest tech melted into obsolete prayer wheels, one last soldier reached the emergency beacon to signal to the rest of the galaxy what had happened here, and all it said was this: don't come to Earth. We brought back their body, but not their mercy. And as the ship broke into starlight, as Kale Voss folded himself deeper into its memory core, now fully reborn, as the Infernus host, one final message echoed into the dark across every frequency, every channel, across every empire that watched Earth and laughed as it burned. You left us in the silence, and now we are the silence that answers back. The signal spread faster than light, not just through technology, but through myth, through psychic fields and worship circuits. The Verhaxi Dominion's cries reached not just allies, but the very foundations of their belief system, 1,000 star clusters away inside the spiral nebula of Saruan, the pantheon of living syntax. Awoke each god-shaped entity, a construct of ritual data and collective memory, pulsed with ancient clarity, summoning themselves into the realm of flesh to confront what had infected their chosen children. They came not to mourn, but to retaliate. 5 of them arrived first, each shaped by the fears of a billion species gods, made of law, geometry, entropy, and sacrifice. And at the center of their arrival point, they found what remained of the mothership, devourer of graves, no longer a vessel, no longer even a weapon, now a floating sarcophagus made from reversed timelines and crystallized human grief. Its surface pulsed with every heartbeat Earth ever lost. They attempted to speak, but the Infernus host spoke first, not with words, but with revelation. It forced them to see what Earth had seen, to feel what children felt as orbital fire erased playgrounds, to hear the broken prayers of doctors in burning hospitals, to taste the iron in the mouths of lovers buried beneath fallen cities. It made gods weep, not out of pity, but out of shame, for these were not gods forged in love, but in control. And what they saw now was that control shattered. Kale Voss no longer spoke like a man, but like a billion voices wrapped around a single will. He rose through the corpse of the mothership, wrapped in quantum ashes, and whispered across dimensions, you don't get to watch anymore, you die with them. And then he launched the reverse miracle, a construct forged inside the god engine's core, made from the memories of forgotten sacrifices and weaponized into meaning. Collapse each god who stood before it was not destroyed, but unremembered. Their names unraveled, their forms lost consistency. They melted not in pain, but in irrelevance. And as they faded, they begged not for mercy, but for significance, crying into the void like orphans of belief. One reached for Kale, screaming, we made you strong, and Kale said, no, you made us patient. And the reverse miracle pulsed again, erasing star churches, rewriting the sacred maps of 10 empires, and seeding doubt into every worshipper's soul across Galaxy's people woke up confused, unable to recall why. They had knelt for so long, entire religions collapsed in minutes. Temples cracked as statues bled rust and fire, and from the center of that collapse a new signal emerged from the Earth-core cathedral, now floating across space like a divine virus. This signal was not a threat, not a promise, it was an invitation, and it said, "This, if you still believe in justice, come prove it to us in our ruins." And the universe realized, with terror, that humanity wasn't just surviving, we were gathering judgment. We had become not a species, not a story, but a cosmic test, and those who failed would not be punished, they would be forgotten. And as Kale Voss expanded the Infernus host across broken star routes, hijacking myth cores and belief, drives his final whisper crawled into every dreaming god across the galaxy. We are the war you prayed would never wake up. Asterisk. They thought it would stop after the gods fell, after the myth networks collapsed in prayer. Engines began spitting static across the dominions of the void, but Earth's gospel had just begun, because vengeance was not our final form. It was only our voice, and now we had learned how to sing. Entire systems blinked off as the Infernus host spread like a psychic wildfire from Kale Voss's presence inside the ruins of the Devourer of Graves to the memory core of dying stars, from black hole monasteries to time-frozen archives. The signal pulsed a perfect rhythm that wasn't heard but felt. Civilizations paused, soldiers dropped weapons. Priests tore out their interface implants, because what was spreading wasn't data, it was conviction, not forced upon them but offered like a match to dry wood. It was the gospel of the burned planet, and it said this: we are what happens when silence is starved and history is rewritten in ash. We are Earth unburied, and we are here to witness you. And that was the word that twisted the galaxy. Witness, not conquer, not purify, not control, just witness. And it broke the empires harder than fire ever could, because it forced them to look into what they did not, into what they believed, into what they erased. The Vrahaxi homeworld began to fragment, not by war, but by memory. Old recordings, unearthed songs they banned, screams they filtered. Statues of the humans they enslaved reappeared in flames across their sky. Their own citizens began carving Earth's name into their temples, not in worship but in guilt. Whole cities collapsed under the pressure of remembered atrocities, and in orbit above them hovered the gospel beacon, shaped like a shattered angel wrapped in chains, forged from Earth's last satellites, pulsing with the faces of the dead. It said nothing but broadcast everything its signal burrowed into black markets, into secret labs, into alien dreams, even into the minds of creatures that had no language, and it showed them the last moments of Earth. A little boy hugging his sister as the sky turned white, a scientist choosing to record one final heartbeat instead of escape, a janitor dying beside the machine he kept clean for 10 years. These were not heroes, they were witnesses, and now their memory was a blade across the universe. And Kale Voss stood above it all, not in glory, not in wrath, but in absolute stillness. The eye of Earth's storm behind him, the Infernus host constructed the memory forge, a living cathedral built from timelines that never got to exist. Every floor made from a ruined childhood, every spire built from broken futures, and its purpose was simple: to listen to the stories that were denied, to absorb every scream that was ignored, and then send them back with fire. Every story we lost now became a weapon, every orphaned memory a map for revenge. And when the forge opened its gates, a beam of golden black energy tore across the stars, not to destroy but to transform. Every world it touched was forced to remember Earth, not as myth but as mirror, and some broke, some burned, but a few began to change. Underground resistance movements rose on planets that once mocked Earth. Warlords fell as their armies wept in confusion, and from the ashes of fear something new was born. Earth wasn't bringing war, it was birthing a reckoning faith, and the galaxy was now its church. And the sermon had just begun. By now, every empire had heard the signal. Every creature with ears or code or memory knew the taste of Earth's scream. It was no longer just a broadcast. It was a faith quake, a psychic rupture that echoed through stars and souls, rewriting the foundations of identity. In places where gods once ruled, the sky Earth now hovered in their stead. A burned planet lit from within by memory and vengeance and something stranger. Forgiveness, but not the kind sung in choirs or printed in scripture. This was earned Forgiveness bathed in consequence, built in agony, forged in truth, whole species collapsed into spiritual silence as the gospel of the burned planet flooded their history servers, rewriting old wars with the truth, showing every time Earth begged and was ignored, every treaty betrayed, every orphan silenced, every fire justified, and now those civilizations faced a question more terrifying than extinction. Will you confess? Across the Andari clusters, golden probes called witness seeds landed. Without force, without threat, they simply listened. And when someone told the truth about their role in Earth's death, the seed blinked gold and vanished, leaving behind a warmth, a peace, a second chance. But when someone lied, when a ruler spun propaganda, or a priest deleted records, the seed pulsed red and unleashed the coral blade, an echo of human sorrow in weapon form forged from a trillion screams shaped like song, and the blade did not slice flesh, it cut out history. Those who denied truth were erased from memory, their names removed, their statues blank, their language unspoken, as if they had never existed. This was not punishment, it was cosmic justice, and across the stars, people began to kneel, not in worship but in responsibility. In repentance, entire armies dropped weapons to carve Earth's name into their armor. Rebel fleets turned on old masters, saying, "We remember what you erased," and the infernus host watched not as a tyrant but as a judge wrapped in light made from pain. Standing tall inside the cathedral above Earth's molten core, Kale Voss expanded his reach, sending fragments of himself across the universe, shards of story and soul, to witness each confession. He did not speak, he listened, he did not kill. He erased, and now the gods that once ruled began to fracture, not from human guns but from human memory, because guilt is heavier than gravity, and Earth had turned its grief into a black hole, pulling every lie into truth. And as the galaxy fell silent, one final voice rang out from a broken moon on the edge of the Vrahaxi Empire. A child no more than 10 with silver eyes stared into the gospel beacon and said softly, "I'm sorry, we thought you were gone." And the beacon blinked gold, and Earth, for the first time in centuries, let out a breath, not in fire, not in rage, but in release, because even vengeance has an endpoint, even rage seeks silence. And now the galaxy began to understand that Earth had not returned to destroy, it had returned to balance. And Kale Voss whispered into the stars, "Now choose, kneel and remember, or vanish and be forgotten." Asterisk. The universe had changed, but Earth had not healed. It remained cracked, blackened, hollowed out like the skull of a saint turned into a temple for ghosts. And yet the galaxy turned its eyes back, not with conquest but with reverence, because Earth had become more than memory. It was now a threshold between punishment and possibility, and Kyle Voss, the infernus host, felt it breathe again, not as soil but as soul. The cathedral, built in its core, pulsed with light from 7 billion stories, each one a person, a moment, a tragedy, now weaponized into wisdom. The surface of the planet shimmered with ghost cities, ruins layered with golden memory. Where buildings once stood, now stood statues of flame, frozen in time, showing what was lost and what must never be repeated. The winds carried whispers of every goodbye never said, and above it all the sky itself bent slightly, a permanent scar in the fabric of reality, where Earth had screamed into the void, and the void had answered. And across the stars the chosen returned, not in fleets, not in armies, but in silence. Humans uploaded into new bodies forged from star iron and neural flame, descended like sparks from the gospel beacon, each one a witness not of death but of what came after. Kale stepped onto the surface barefoot because he no longer needed armor. The Earth knew him. It opened a path through ash and wire, through shattered monuments and crushed helmets, leading him to the heart of the cathedral, where no one had entered since the final breath of the human race. The doors opened not mechanically but with memory singing his name, and inside the cathedral there was no gold, no throne, no holy flame, just a chair and a book, and on the pages were the stories of the dead, not glorious tales but honest ones, the tired ones, the painful ones, the truth the galaxy had tried to erase. And he sat and he read, and with every name he whispered into the stone. The wind carried it to the stars, and the stars burned a little brighter, because now they remembered, now they knew that what made Earth divine was not its wrath, not its fire, but its refusal to forget. And then the final miracle began, not with light but with invitation, as the cathedral sent a pulse across time and space, a single message to every species, every child, every machine. every god, and it said, "Come tell your story." And for the first time, the galaxy moved not in war, not in fear, but in pilgrimage to a ruined world made holy. By pain to kneel in ash and speak into the silence and be heard, and the Vrahaxi, who once led the slaughter, now wept in circles around the memory forge, carving the names of their victims into their skin, singing human lullabies in broken accents. And across the stars entire fleets turned into archives, warships into libraries, battles into sermons and kale. Voss smiled, not because they obeyed, but because they understood, and then he rose not as king, not as savior, but as witness prime, and walked into the light of the forge, ready to greet the next voice, the next memory, the next soul, because this was not the end of Earth. This was the opening chapter of its second gospel, and it would be written not in fire, but in truth. They came in silence across the black oceans of space, their ships stripped of weapons, their flags replaced with stories, whole civilizations that once hunted humans, now arrived on Earth not as masters, but as pilgrims drawn by the pulse of the cathedral, which no longer spoke in language, but in gravity it bent reality, gently pulling memory-rich minds toward the broken planet. The ash throne at Earth's heart had become the most sacred site in existence, not because it offered salvation, but because it offered clarity, and one by one they arrived biomechs from the acid moons of Unkar, dragging memory crystals carved from their ancestors' screams, insectal priests from the Orion rifts chanting in broken Terran tongues holding bones they once called trophies, now recast as prayers. Even artificial minds sent their avatars shaped like human, children asking softly if the stories of our end were true and Kale. Voss stood at the threshold of the cathedral, no longer bound by a single shape, sometimes a man, sometimes a woman, sometimes a whisper made of light. Because truth has no form, it only echoes, and he welcomed them not with power but with presence, and asked only one question: what will you offer in return for memory? And the answers came like rivers. One offered knowledge, entire universes of tech folded into fractal scrolls, but the cathedral said nothing. Another offered armies to guard Earth, but the winds stayed still, and then a small creature from a dead sun placed a single picture, a drawing of a human child saved during the war by a soldier whose name it never knew, and the cathedral glowed gold and sang for 3 days, because memory is not weighed in size but in sincerity, and as the stream of pilgrims grew, so did the challenge. Not all who came sought redemption, some came to exploit Earth's myth, to sell forgiveness as commodity, to turn pain into empire, and for them the cathedral did not speak, it simply opened the eco-vault, a chamber beneath the surface filled with the rage Earth never released, and there those false pilgrims were unwritten, not killed, but erased, their deeds deleted from all timelines. Their legacy left blank, a warning that Earth's mercy is not weakness, it is a blade that waits, and Ko watched it all, not as judge, but as balance, ensuring that for every truth honored, no lie survived. And across the stars, new temples rose, not of stone, but of story, places where people gathered not to worship Earth, but to confess what they had done, to learn from its silence and remember its burn. And still the question returned again and again: how did the humans survive? What did they become? How did they turn memory into godhood? And the answer was simple, written in fire across the cathedral gates, because no one else listened, and so we listened to ourselves, and in doing so, we found not vengeance, but transformation, and now we offered that to the galaxy, not as gift, not as curse, but as mirror, and those who dared to look into it would find not Earth, but themselves, asterisk. They were the ones who started it, the ones who shattered our cities, erased our skies, turned Earth into smoke, the first to strike and the last to flee. When the silence took hold, they called themselves the Eldruk Prima species, so ancient they considered time a toy and called extinction a form of diplomacy. They were the ones who made first contact, not with words but with fire, the ones who said humans were unworthy of space, unworthy of survival, unworthy of being remembered. But now they came not with armadas, but with bare feet and downturned eyes, and a question they had no right to ask. They came to Earth wearing no armor, carrying no code, their bodies scarred by their own shame, their ships stripped of titles, just iron hulls carved with the names of those they killed. They landed outside the cathedral and waited 3 days, not one step forward, not one signal sent. Just waited until Voss appeared, not as infernus, not as flame, but as stillness wrapped in flesh, with eyes that remembered and voices behind him that never slept. and the Eldrek Prime bowed as they never had before and said, 5 impossible words, can we become human too? And for a moment the cathedral itself froze, as if history choked on the question, as if the ash beneath them had never expected this. The enemy, the architects of the end, now asking not for power, not for peace, but for identity. Kale did not answer, not immediately, because to be human was not a title, it was a cost. It was grief sharpened into instinct. It was choosing to feel even when silence was easier. It was never forgetting, even when remembering tore you apart. And so Kale led them not into the cathedral, but into the hollow mile, a stretch of earth untouched since the fall, where nothing worked, where no tech survived, where the ground still bled. And there he asked them to walk, not as guests, but as witnesses, and every step showed them something: a child crying beneath rubble, unseen, a father shielding his daughter with his corpse, a scientist burning alive while transmitting hope. And with every step the Eldrek cracked, not from shame, but from something worse, understanding. And when they reached the end, one of them fell to his knees trembling and whispered, "We didn't know." And Kale answered, "You didn't want to." And still they did not leave, they stayed on Earth in the silence, building no cities, asking for no land, just walking the hollow mile again and again, until one day the cathedral opened to them, not because they earned it, but because they endured it. And inside they were shown a single name, not theirs, but one they erased, a name carved into their DNA, the name of the first human they ever killed. And Kale said, "Say it." And when they did, the cathedral glowed not in gold, but in gray, the color of morning and forgiveness. And it whispered, "Begin again." And from that moment the Eldrek Prime were no longer what they had been. They were not human, not yet, but they were becoming. And that was the miracle, not that Earth forgave, but that Earth allowed the possibility of change. And across the stars, this moment echoed louder than any war, louder than any death. The destroyers of Earth now carried its gospel, not as priests, but as pilgrims. And those who watched knew that something greater had risen from ash, something no empire, no god, no weapon had ever created. Not peace, not domination, but transformation. And that was the new truth Earth had carved into the bones of time. You cannot erase a people who remember how to become more than what broke them.